What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Jack's Mailbag, the series where I answer your Gamecock baseball questions every week. If you have a question you want answered on next week's episode, please leave it in the comments below on this YouTube video, or you can go to GamecockCentral.com on the Insiders Forum. And if you're a subscriber there, you can go ahead and leave a comment on a thread that I post every single week at the beginning of the week on Mondays typically, and you can drop your questions there below. But without further ado, let's get into our first question of the week coming from USC BKC Fan 1. And they ask, in the latest basketball scholarship breakdown, you show Michi Johnson, Studi, and Gray with one more year. Do you think there's any chance that they come back? So for just right off the bat, the point of this show and series is to talk Gamecock baseball primarily. Maybe later down the road, I'll do something basketball or football centric, but I think it all depends on how this goes. So I'm going to answer this question, but just for future reference, make sure you guys are asking baseball related questions. But to answer the question, I think Michi Johnson probably won't come back, right? I think he's established himself as a really solid player despite the little bit of a struggle he's been through. You got to remember last year, after the season ended, he went through the beginning of the NBA draft / combine process where he, got an evaluation, a grade per se. And I think the recommendation was that, it's probably better to come back for a year and see how you can build up your draft stock. And I think personally he has. He's been really good this year for this team. I mean, it's not just the scoring that he does. He's also a fantastic, defensive player, in my opinion. He does well rebounding, and he's also a big assist guy, and he can also pick up some steals. So I think that's just something that you have to look at. He's more than just a scorer, in my opinion, and he's a great team player. And I think he's going to go out on a high note. South Carolina, he's going to leave it better than he found it, in my opinion. And then with Studi and Josh Gray, they're a little more interesting. I think they'll probably do what with Michi did last year and probably go through the draft combine and all that sort of stuff. But I do think ultimately they do come back. I think it just serves them a little better. But either way, I think this men's basketball team, we've talked about it on the hard foul this week and stuff with Joe and I. I think this team is set up for success for years to come. I think Lamont Paris has them going in the right direction, and they're going to get more talent in the future. But it's also important to see, I think they're going to get some guys to come back next year. They have a lot of young talent on this team. So we'll see what happens. But thank you for the question. Next question comes from TL Spur, and they ask which pitchers are in conversation for weekend spots. So right now, and we kind of touched on this a little bit last week, right now, you're looking at about 7 to 8 guys approximately that are competing in these scrimmages and whatnot for spots in the weekend rotation as well as midweek starts. And right now, I would say Eli Jones is probably your Friday starter. That just seems to be the direction that this team is heading, and I think that's a good guy that you want starting on Fridays. He obviously 2 years ago came back from Tommy John, had a few midweek starts, didn't really throw a ton. Then last year, his first full year back without any injuries, he starts out the year kind of just as a reliever, I think, just that sort of role. And then when the injuries happen for South Carolina, he, blossoms into a potential weekend Friday night starter. I mean, we saw it with a few starts here and there last year where he was actually really solid. So I think if he really puts it together, he has the chance to be one of the better pitchers in the SEC. But again, it's kind of just ifs with this rotation. If you kind of, catch my drift with that. Next up, I would say on Saturdays, you're either looking at Dylan Eskew or Matthew Becker. I think it really depends what Mark Kingston wants to do. Does he go righty, righty, then lefty, or does he go righty, lefty, righty? I think it doesn't really matter either way, however he does it. I think Eskew has really shined during these scrimmages and whatnot. He just has thrown the ball really well, and he's continued to impress. And then with Becker, the thing I always talk about with him, I know he can throw strikes. I mean, we've seen him do it for the last since he came to South Carolina. He is just he's a real strike thrower, can pitch to contact really well. The thing that's always hindered him is the walks. If he gets those down, then we're looking at a guy that can really compete at a high level as a starting pitcher every weekend. but that's kind of to be determined. And then with, the midweek stuff, and again, just because I said this might be the Friday, Saturday, Sunday starters doesn't mean it's going to be. It always can change. And this is just what I'm feeling and what probably might happen. Who knows? But you've also got other guys like Ty Good, Roman Kimball, Joey Wittig, guys like that also maybe the three starter. Who knows? Maybe they're the midweek starter. It's all going to depend. But I think right now you've got a lot of good options. And again, it really comes down to whether or not these guys can reach their potential. If they can, South Carolina's rotation is in business. Our next question comes from Diamondcock, and this is a lengthy one. He asks, do we have enough quality to approach games with a Johnny Holstaff philosophy? I believe we have two legitimate weekend starters, but we may have to keep switching pitchers until we find the guy that has enough control to be effective, whether that's one inning or five. I think we have enough guys with some electric stuff, but control or lack thereof is certainly concerning. So I definitely think Diamondcock has a point there. It's a good question. I don't know what a Johnny Holstaff philosophy is. If I'm missing something, you can leave it in the comments below and let me know. Apologies in advance, but I do think Diamondcock didn't name what two legitimate weekend starters they're referring to. I'm going to assume it's Eli Jones and Matthew Becker. I probably agree with you. I think those are your two guys that are definitely capable of going out there and doing it. We've seen it over the years now with Eli Jones, as I referenced before, had a few good starts last year, particularly against Arkansas, where he really broke through. And then Matthew Becker, he's had some good starts here and there. Freshman year he came on and blossomed in his first start against Texas, and then next week goes down to Tennessee and pitches a really good game. I think South Carolina got swept that weekend, but that's neither here nor there. These two guys have the experience now to be the veterans on this pitching staff. After that, they do have some more veterans and older guys, but like I said before, it really comes down to whether or not they can kind of reach their ceiling. But I'm pretty confident they can figure it out. So next question comes from Fog22, and they ask, since we are not struggling mightily on the mound, how many of approximately 20 pitchers on the roster do we think we use this year? I think we'll see a good bit of them pitch in non-conference play, excluding Clemson, where I think you just throw your best guys at that point. And that leads me into my point here is that once SEC play starts, you're not seeing I don't want to call it random guys, but you're not throwing a guy that might pitch in a 19-1 blowout and doesn't pitch the rest of the weekend. I think you're throwing your guys that you know are going to get outs because every game in SEC play is super impactful. I think South Carolina today in the SEC preseason coaches poll is picked fourth in the East. So obviously, with how loaded the SEC is in terms of baseball, if you guys have been watching over the years, they've got some work to do, and I think South Carolina can definitely do it. It just really comes down to how the pitching plays out, and I don't think you want to roll the dice with guys that might be hit or miss or might be a little questionable. You're throwing your best guys, your Chris Veaches, your Austin Williamsons, your Dylan Eskews, your Matthew Beckers, Eli Joneses. It goes on and on. But the point is, I think a lot of guys are going to get looks during this non-conference play, and think of it almost like a trial run, right? You're auditioning to see if you can pitch in SEC play. Because let's be real, South Carolina's got a really favorable non-conference schedule, in my opinion. I think they're probably going to work through it pretty well and have a great record there, which leads them right into SEC play. And this is the time where you get those guys that can pitch with minimal pressure, in my opinion, in these kind of lopsided games where the offense is going to put up a ton of runs, and you get to see what they do pitching wise in these situations. And there might be some close games here and there, which actually might work more towards their advantage, just to get those real reps. But again, once SEC play starts, you're throwing your best guys, in my opinion. Next question comes from Creed Thoughts, and they ask, any changes to your starting outfield based on the past weekend? Seems like Kennedy Jones has been pretty quiet so far. Is he 100%? I only ask because just checking the Gamecock player development tweets, he's yet to appear as a top offensive player in a scrimmage. So, like I said last week, I don't see, if you guys watched last week, I came out with my predictions on what the starting lineup might look like on opening day. I don't expect that to be what it ultimately is. I think it's just going to be Mark Kingston's going to come up with something probably maybe a little similar, but it's hard to dictate what he's going to do. And there's a lot of position battles out there, and the outfield's no exception. He did. In case you guys missed it, you can go ahead and read my article on Gamecock Central if you want, which provides a little more details on some things with the infield. But Parker Noland is officially going to start at second base for the Gamecocks on opening day, which I believe I had him hitting in the 8 or 9 hole, maybe ahead of Will Tippett on opening day in my predictions. So 1 for 9. So let's hope we get the rest right. But in all seriousness, no, I think with the outfield, what I've been hearing and what might happen, it seems like Blake Jackson's going to be hitting leadoff for this team. And I had that in my prediction. I thought he was going to be in center field on opening day, but it seems like he might be playing in left field. We'll see what happens just from some rumblings and stuff. But and then that would mean someone like Dylan Brewer would be in center field potentially. So we'll see what happens with that. And then you got Petrie or Ethan Petrie out in right field. I saw him playing a little bit of third base in a scrimmage last weekend. And then I asked him about it when the media met with some of the baseball players last week. And he's comfortable with playing anywhere, obviously, as that would kind of be the player speak kind of answer. Coach put me wherever. But I think he's best suited for right field. I think that's where he really shines. And I don't think people give him enough credit for his defense. I think that he's definitely, I think he's definitely good out there in right field. Getting to Kennedy Jones, though, with him, he's obviously transfer big time power bat. I think he hit 18 homers last year at UNC Greensboro. The thing with him is he struggled a little bit in some scrimmages. I think he had a homer last weekend, but outside of that, it's just I don't know. I think he's been a little spotty in my opinion. I do think the thing with him is though, you got to play him at some point, right? You can't have his bat on the bench because I think it's when he's hot, he's hot. And I mean, then again, it's just scrimmages. I mean, once real play starts, I think maybe he heats up and maybe he earns a spot. I think that's kind of the thing that Mark Kingston's also gonna have to figure out. It's not just his pitching rotation, but his starting lineup. I mean, it's gonna look completely different from opening day to the end of the season. Let's just put that out there. But with Jones, I think he'll get a few starts, I think, to start the year, whether that's in left field or at DH. We'll see what happens there. But I think with him, it's just get him in there, see what he does. If his bat heats up, great, keep it going. If not, then I think that's something that they kind of got to figure out with how to platoon him. Maybe you have a lot of outfielders, and you can only play 3 guys out there and have a DH. So it's tough sledding, but it's just that's the reality of this game. Left field loonies asks another long one here. I think our offensive depth can be a huge advantage for us this year. Assuming we stay healthy, we should be able to avoid or significantly reduce offensive slumps like we saw towards the middle of SEC play last year. Guys don't need to stay struggling at the plate while they're in a cold spell, and we can plug and play where needed. I'm not too worried about arms yet. I think guys are still getting warmed up, but no doubt it's the biggest question mark. It shouldn't be too much of an issue until Ole Miss in mid March. But by then, we'll need 2 strong starting arms. Curious what you guys think. So, in my opinion, I do think the offense is going to probably carry the load this year. It just feels like this is a offense that's due to make some noise, and I think there's some validity to that statement in that you have a lot of guys that you can plug and play if someone goes cold. Like for instance, if let's say Blake Jackson has a really cold stretch where he's 0 for his last 15 or whatever. Well, luckily you have a bat like Kennedy Jones, maybe off the bench, that can come in and play left field. You also have Carson Hornung, who we haven't really talked about much at all. And I don't think I had him in my starting lineup for opening day, but that's just because of how much depth and talent there is on this year's offensive team. But with the pitching, it's also like I keep saying it. It's all going to come down to whether or not these guys can reach their ceiling, reach their potential. Because if not, it could get bad. And with the way injuries impacted this team at the end of April going into May last year, I mean, you saw how bad this team kind of played. I mean, it was ugly going into SEC, the tournament down in Hoover. But luckily, they got some guys back at the right time, and got hot at the regional. Obviously, they lost in Gainesville for the Super, but that's just the way things go sometimes. So I think once SEC play starts, as I said before, you want to get everything kind of situated and under wraps. You want to have an idea of who your starters are, who your three best pitchers are going to be, and what your bullpen might look like. And then if they got that figured out and it's all kind of clicking, South Carolina might be a force to be reckoned with once SEC play gets going. Phoebus Jones asks, have you seen any freshmen that appear to have some real arm talent and might be candidates to play extensively this year? If so, were they drafted and where? Thanks. One guy I've been impressed with is Joey Whitting. I saw him throw on Wednesday for an inning, and granted, it was only one inning. So, but he looked fantastic. It was funny. So the way South Carolina did their scrimmage on Wednesday was it was more like a situational type thing. It wasn't really offensive driven. They didn't keep track of runs or anything. It was more like they put runners on second and first at the start of each half inning, and pitchers would have to kind of work out of jams. Some guys had success, others didn't. So it's just to kind of test where they're at, I think. And Whitting was up to the challenge. He, I think, got all three outs in just 7 pitches. He got a fielder's choice, and then he got a quick double play ball. And it was funny. I think Mark Kingston was saying, during the scrimmage, you could hear him. We were sitting up in the press box. You could hear him. Joey, stay out there for one more batter. And, it was no problem for him because he, I think, quickly got a strikeout after that. So he's someone that I know is probably competing for a rotation spot. I personally would like to see what he can do in a midweek, low pressure type situation for right now. But I think at some point, you got to remember, he's only a freshman. I think at some point, he's someone that, depending on what South Carolina does in the future, can really be a impactful weekend guy for the foreseeable future. Another guy that I've liked seeing their stuff from is Eddie Copper. He's also looked pretty good on the mound, in my opinion. A real good strike thrower. Saw him throw, I think, last Sunday, and just breezed through 2 quick innings, 6 up, 6 down. That's kind of what you want out of your freshmen right now, is guys that can get outs. And they have a lot of freshmen on this pitching staff, and you want to find out who your best guys are that can either be midweek starters, potentially be in the weekend rotation, and maybe a long shot. But more likely your long relievers that come in and pitch in low pressure type games at the beginning of the year. But those are 2 guys that have really stood out to me. I'm sure there's some other ones out there, and we'll see what happens. But again, it's kind of going to be all hands on deck with finding out who your best pitchers are at the beginning of the year. Our final question comes from True Check, and they ask, whomever opens on the opening day, what is first pitch? I say split seam fastball. I feel like with the first pitch on opening day, it typically ends up being a fastball, right? Because I think you want to get your first pitch out of the way, and you want to make sure it's a good one, right? You might get a guy, I remember a few years ago, just random baseball fact off the top of my head. I think it was maybe like 2017 or 2018 MLB opening day. And the first pitch of the entire MLB season, the Cubs were playing like in Miami against the Marlins, and Ian Happ just crushes a first pitch fastball, first pitch of the entire season, and he hits a homer. So you might get a guy that swings first pitch fastball. So you always want to be cognizant of that. But, kind of focusing on South Carolina, I think you throw a first pitch fastball, maybe not right down the heart of the plate, but throw it over for a strike. So that is going to do it for all the questions this week. Really appreciate it. It was a lot more pitcher heavy this week. We're 1 week away from opening day. I cannot believe we are saying that. It's crazy how much time has flown by since the last time South Carolina played in that super regional down in Gainesville. Again, if you have any questions you want answered next week, go ahead and drop a comment on this YouTube video in the comments below, or be sure to stay tuned for our next Insider Forum post on GamecockCentral.com. If you're a subscriber, you can go ahead and comment on my thread with a question for next week. Again, opening day coming up, so hope to see a lot of good questions. And yeah, thank you guys so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day.